Honor in the shadows. The sun sank low on the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink as the day surrendered to dusk. Thomas Reynolds pulled into an abandoned parking lot on the outskirts of town, his old pickup truck rumbling to a stop. The quietness of the place offered solace, a temporary reprieve from the relentless whirl of memories that haunted him, a veteran's quiet burden. At 67, Thomas carried the weight of his service in every step, his back straight despite the aches that came with age. He had faced wars, not for glory, but for the promise of freedom, and now sought peace in the simple rhythms of everyday life. As he stepped out of his truck, the sound of distant engines shattered the serenity. 3 motorcycles roared into the lot, their growling engines echoing off the concrete walls. Thomas turned to see the bikers, their leather jackets adorned with patches and their faces rough and unshaven. They weren't from around here. He could tell by the way they swaggered, carrying an air of mischief and malice. "Hey, old man," one of them shouted as he killed the engine of his bike. "Nice uniform. Still playing soldier." Thomas glanced at the man, his face calm, betraying none of the unease stirring inside. He wore a simple button-up shirt, but the dog tags around his neck and the small military pin on his collar revealed his past. Another biker dismounted, sauntering closer with a sneer. "What war was it, Grandpa?" "World War I." The group burst into laughter, circling Thomas like wolves closing in on prey. Their taunts grew louder, their mockery sharper, but Thomas didn't rise to the bait. He had faced far worse than their juvenile antics. Instead, he reached into his pocket and calmly pulled out his phone. "Oh, look," one of them jeered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "He's calling for backup. What's it gonna be? The retirement home brigade." Their laughter echoed through the lot, but Thomas's composure didn't waver. He pressed the phone to his ear, his expression unreadable, and spoke in a measured tone. "Yeah, it's me," he said quietly. "I've got a situation here. Could use some backup." He paused for a moment before adding, "You know the place." As he ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket, the bikers exchanged amused glances. "Backup, huh?" The leader sneered. "Hate to break it to you, old man, but it's just you and us." Thomas said nothing, his silence unnerving them more than they cared to admit. "All right," the leader growled, stepping forward. "Let's show him what happens to old guys who mouth off." But before they could act, the distant roar of engines filled the air. The sound grew louder, and the bikers turned to see a convoy of motorcycles heading their way. Their confidence faltered as the headlights pierced the growing darkness. "What the hell?" one of them muttered, his bravado slipping. Thomas stood motionless, his steady gaze fixed on the approaching convoy. "That," he said, tilting his head toward the riders, "is my backup." The motorcycles rolled into the lot, their engines rumbling like a thunderstorm. The convoy was formidable, at least 20 strong, and every rider wore a black leather jacket bearing the insignia of the Patriot Riders, a veteran biker club known for their unwavering loyalty to their brothers and sisters in arms. The bikers exchanged nervous glances as the Patriot Riders dismounted in unison. These weren't just any bikers. They were seasoned warriors, men and women who had served their country with distinction. Their presence radiated authority, the kind that silenced rooms and demanded respect. A tall man with a gray-streaked beard stepped forward, his eyes sharp and assessing. He extended a hand to Thomas. "Good to see you, Sergeant." "Good to see you too, Captain," Thomas replied, gripping his hand firmly. The captain turned to the trio of bikers, his gaze cold and unyielding. "We heard there was a problem," he said, his voice low but laced with menace. The leader of the bikers raised his hands defensively, his earlier bravado gone. "Hey, look, we don't want any trouble. We were just messing around. No harm done, right?" "No harm done." The captain's voice dropped an octave, and the intensity in his eyes made the bikers flinch. "You think harassing a veteran is just messing around? You've got a lot to learn about respect. The other Patriot riders began to close in, their expressions grim. The bikers backed away, their confidence thoroughly shattered. "Get out of here," the captain said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And pray you never cross paths with us again." Without another word, the bikers scrambled to their motorcycles and sped off, their bravado replaced by sheer terror. As the dust settled, Thomas turned to the captain. "Thanks for coming." The captain placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "You'd do the same for any of us." The other riders gathered around, offering handshakes and words of camaraderie. In that moment, Thomas felt a warmth he hadn't felt in years, a reminder that while the battles of the past still haunted him, he was never alone. The lot, once filled with jeers and threats, now resonated with the hum of shared respect and unbreakable bonds. His story of Thomas and the Patriot Riders reminds us of the power of solidarity and the importance of standing up for what's right. True strength isn't about intimidation or bravado. It's about integrity, honor, and the courage to protect those who cannot protect themselves. In a world often divided, this tale serves as a beacon, showing that unity and respect can overcome even the darkest moments. The ripple effect of respect. The parking lot grew quiet again, save for the occasional murmur of the Patriot Riders exchanging words and firm handshakes. Thomas, though grateful for their intervention, wasn't one to bask in attention. He stood at the edge of the group, his eyes scanning the horizon where the three bikers had fled, their taunts now replaced with a trail of dust. The captain turned back to him, his face softening. "You okay, Sergeant?" Thomas nodded, the lines on his face easing into a faint smile. "I faced worse, Captain. But it's good to know I've still got backup when it counts." The captain chuckled. "Always, my friend. You earned that the moment you put on that uniform." The group dispersed slowly, with some riders mounting their bikes while others lingered for quiet conversations. A younger rider, no more than 30, with tattoos curling up his arms and a noticeable limp, approached Thomas. "Sergeant Reynolds, sir?" the young man asked hesitantly. Thomas raised an eyebrow at the formality, but nodded. "That's me." The young rider straightened, a mix of nervousness and admiration in his expression. "I just wanted to say, thank you for your service. My dad used to tell me stories about guys like you. He served in Desert Storm." Thomas's gaze softened. "Your dad raised you well, and you're serving now, I see." He gestured to the rider's jacket, adorned with a small patch indicating he had served in Afghanistan. The young man smiled sheepishly. "Trying to carry the torch, I guess, seeing what happened tonight. It makes me proud to be part of something bigger than myself." Thomas clapped him gently on the shoulder. "You're doing more than trying, son. You're part of a legacy. Never forget that." As the riders prepared to leave, Thomas noticed that the captain had stayed behind, waiting for him. "You heading home?" the captain asked, tilting his head toward Thomas's old pickup truck. "I was," Thomas replied, "but now I'm thinking maybe it's time to stop by the diner for some coffee. Been too long since I sat down with good company." The captain grinned. "Now you're talking." A familiar stranger. The two men arrived at the diner a few miles away, its neon sign flickering against the night sky. Inside, the smell of coffee and grilled burgers filled the air. A few patrons looked up as the veterans entered, their presence commanding quiet respect. Thomas and the captain slid into a booth near the window, ordering coffee and pie. As they waited, the captain leaned forward, his tone serious. "You handled yourself well back there, Thomas. But I have to ask, what made you stay so calm?" Thomas took a sip of his water, his gaze distant for a moment. "When you've seen what I've seen, Captain, you learn that fear doesn't help. Fear gets in the way. I wasn't about to give those punks the satisfaction of seeing me rattle." The captain nodded, understanding. Still, not everyone would have stood their ground like that. Before Thomas could reply, the bell above the diner door jingled. A familiar face stepped inside, the younger rider who had spoken to Thomas earlier. He looked around, spotted the pair, and hesitated before walking over. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "Not at all," the captain said, gesturing to the seat across from them. The young rider sat down, his expression earnest. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, Sergeant, about the legacy. I guess I never really thought about it that way before." Thomas set his coffee cup down, leaning forward slightly. "Let me tell you something, son. The legacy isn't just about medals or battles. It's about how we carry ourselves every day. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." The young man nodded, absorbing the words. "I want to be that kind of man. For my dad. For my brothers who didn't make it back." "You already are," the captain said firmly. "You're here, aren't you? That says a lot. A community of strength." As the night wore on, the conversation deepened. Stories were shared, some lighthearted, others heavy with the weight of loss and sacrifice. The young rider listened intently, soaking up the wisdom of his elders. But it wasn't just about war stories. They talked about life after service, about the challenges of finding purpose and the importance of building a community. "We've all got scars," Thomas said at one point, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Some you can see, some you can't. But scars mean you survived. And surviving means you've still got work to do." The young rider looked at him, his eyes shining with newfound determination. "Then I guess I've got a lot of work to do." Thomas smiled. "We all do, son. We all do." A ripple of change. By the time they left the diner, the night had grown colder. The stars scattered across the sky like a tapestry. As Thomas climbed into his truck, he glanced at the younger rider, who was standing by his motorcycle, talking to the captain. Something told Thomas that tonight had been more than just an encounter in a parking lot. It had been a turning point, not just for the bikers who had fled, but for the young rider, for the captain, and even for himself. Driving home, Thomas thought about how one small act of standing firm, of refusing to back down, had set off a ripple. It had brought a group of veterans together, inspired a young man to honor his father's legacy, and perhaps even planted a seed of humility in the hearts of those who had mocked him. The world was far from perfect, but Thomas had seen enough to know that real change didn't come from grand gestures. It came from moments like this, from ordinary people choosing to do the right thing, one small step at a time. As he pulled into his driveway and turned off the engine, Thomas sat in the quiet of the night for a moment longer. He thought about the patriot riders, about the younger generation stepping up, and about the 3 bikers who had fled into the dark. Then he smiled, a small, knowing smile, because in the end, he wasn't alone. And neither was anyone else willing to stand for something greater than themselves. This continuation builds on the earlier part of the story while deepening its emotional resonance, focusing on the themes of mentorship, legacy, and the ripple effect of small but meaningful actions. The echo of honor. The morning sun broke over the horizon, bathing the town in soft golden light. For Thomas, the day after the parking lot incident started like any other. He sipped his coffee at the small kitchen table, staring out the window at his neatly trimmed yard. Yet something about the previous evening lingered in his mind, a strange mix of pride, gratitude, and unresolved curiosity. As he sat there, the familiar sound of a motorcycle engine broke the stillness. He looked out and saw the young rider from the diner parking his bike at the curb. The sight brought a faint smile to Thomas's face. He opened the door just as the young man approached. "You're up early," Thomas remarked, leaning against the doorframe. "Couldn't sleep," the rider admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "Kept thinking about everything you said last night. About purpose. About legacy." Thomas stepped aside, gesturing for him to come in. "Coffee?" "Yes, sir," the young man said, following him into the modest kitchen. As they sat down, Thomas poured them each a cup of coffee. "So, what's on your mind?" The young rider hesitated, his hands wrapped around the mug as if drawing warmth from it. "I realized I've been drifting," he said finally. "I served my time, came home, but I don't feel settled. Like I'm just floating through life without direction." Thomas nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's not unusual, son. Transitioning back to civilian life isn't easy. The battlefield may be behind us, but the battles don't end." The writer looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of frustration and hope. "But how do you find your place again? How do you matter? A mission beyond the uniform." Thomas leaned back in his chair, considering the question. "You find purpose in serving others," he said finally. "It doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't have to be public, but it has to be real. When I came back, I struggled too. The uniform gave me identity, structure, and a mission. Losing that felt like losing myself. But then I realized something. Service doesn't stop when you hang up the uniform. It just changes shape." The young writer nodded slowly. "That's why you joined the Patriot Riders." "In part," Thomas replied. "It gave me a community. A way to keep giving back, to stand with my brothers and sisters. But it also reminded me that our service can inspire others, even those who've never worn the uniform." The writer was quiet for a moment, digesting the words. Then, as if a switch flipped, he straightened in his seat. "I want to do that. I want to be part of something like that." Thomas's lips curled into a knowing smile. "Then it's time you met the rest of the riders. The next generation." Later that day, Thomas and the young rider arrived at the Patriot Riders Clubhouse, a modest but well-maintained building on the outskirts of town. The parking lot was already filling up with motorcycles, their chrome gleaming in the sunlight. As they walked inside, the hum of conversation and laughter filled the air. The captain was the first to notice them. He stood and extended a hand to the young rider. "Good to see you again," he said, his voice warm but commanding. "What brings you here?" The rider glanced at Thomas before replying. "I want to be part of this. I want to contribute." The captain studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Well, we don't turn away willing hands, but being part of the riders isn't just about the jacket or the bike. It's about the values we stand for: honor, respect, and service. You think you're ready for that?" "Yes, sir," the young man said firmly. The captain exchanged a look with Thomas, who gave a small nod. "All right then," the captain said. "Stick around. Get to know the crew. We'll see if you're a good fit." A chance encounter. As the young rider mingled with the group, Thomas took a seat near the back, enjoying the camaraderie but content to observe. That's when he noticed a familiar figure hesitating by the entrance. It was one of the bikers from the parking lot incident, the youngest of the three. He stood awkwardly, his hands stuffed in his jacket pockets, his eyes darting around the room. Thomas stood and approached him, his posture calm but firm. "You've got guts showing up here," he said evenly. The biker flinched but didn't back away. I wanted to apologize," he stammered. "For what we did. It wasn't right." Thomas studied him for a moment, weighing the sincerity in his words. "Why now?" The biker shuffled his feet, looking down. "After last night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. You didn't deserve what we did. And when I saw all those riders show up, I realized what respect looks like, what it means." Thomas nodded slowly. "Respect isn't given lightly, son. It's earned. But taking responsibility for your actions, that's a good start." The biker looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. Do you think I could change? Be better?" Thomas's gaze softened. "Everyone can change. The question is, are you willing to do the work?" The biker nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir. I am." A new legacy. Over the weeks that followed, the young rider and the repentant biker found themselves working alongside the Patriot Riders, helping with community projects, organizing charity rides, and listening to the stories of veterans who had walked paths they could barely imagine. For the young rider, it was a chance to channel his energy into something meaningful, to honor his father's legacy and build one of his own. For the biker, it was redemption, a way to make amends for his past and learn the values of humility and service. And for Thomas, it was proof that the ripple effect of a single act of courage could spread farther than he'd ever imagined. He saw in these two young men the seeds of a new generation, one that would carry forward the lessons of the past while forging a brighter future. The enduring message. The story doesn't end with a single moment or event. It continues in the lives of those touched by it. Thomas's stand in the parking lot was more than a display of bravery. It was a reminder that integrity and respect have the power to transform not only individuals but entire communities. And in the echo of those moments, a new legacy is born. A legacy built on service, redemption, and the enduring strength of human connection. Building a bridge of change. The months following the parking lot incident saw the Patriot Riders grow stronger, not just in numbers but in purpose. Their missions expanded beyond camaraderie and remembrance. They became a force for change in the community. Veterans who once felt invisible found renewed dignity, and younger men and women discovered guidance in the wisdom of those who had walked the path before them. Thomas, though often understated in his role, became a quiet pillar within this transformation. His house turned into a small hub of activity where members of the Riders and other community figures would gather for discussions, planning, and sometimes just for his sage advice over a pot of his famously strong coffee. One crisp autumn morning, Thomas received an unexpected visitor. Standing on his porch was not a fellow rider or a veteran, but the leader of the bikers who had harassed him that fateful evening. Dressed more modestly now, the man looked almost unrecognizable, his leather jacket replaced by a simple denim one, and his once defiant expression now subdued. "Mr. Reynolds," the man began, his voice low but steady, "I wanted to talk." Thomas opened the door wider, gesturing for him to step inside. "Coffee?" The man hesitated before nodding. "Sure. A conversation that matters." As they sat in the small, sunlit kitchen, the man, who introduced himself as Jake, fidgeted with his mug. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," he began, his voice laden with regret. "What we did, it wasn't right. I know an apology doesn't fix it, but I wanted you to hear it from me." Thomas studied Jake carefully, his weathered face unreadable. "What changed your mind?" Jake sighed, staring into his coffee as though searching for answers. "After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about how calm you were, how you didn't fight back or yell. You just stood there, like you knew something we didn't. And then those riders showed up." He paused, shaking his head. "I've never felt so small in my life." Thomas leaned back, his expression softening slightly. "You were acting out of ignorance, Jake. But realizing you were wrong is the first step. What matters is what you do next." Jake looked up, his eyes earnest. "That's why I'm here. I want to change. I don't want to be that guy anymore. But I don't know how." Thomas's gaze held steady, his tone even. Change isn't easy. It's not about flipping a switch. It's about showing up every day and choosing to be better than you were yesterday. It's about making amends, not just with me but with yourself. Jake nodded slowly. "How do I start?" "You've already started," Thomas said. "But if you're serious, you'll need to find a community that keeps you accountable. People who will call you out when you fall and lift you up when you stand." Jake hesitated. Do you think the Riders would ever give someone like me a chance?" Thomas smiled faintly. "The Riders believe in redemption, but you'll have to prove you're ready for it." Joining the fold. Jake's journey to becoming part of the Patriot Riders was anything but easy. At first, he worked quietly in the background, volunteering for every community project they organized. From repairing homes for elderly veterans to cleaning up parks, he showed up early, stayed late, and avoided the spotlight. The Riders, initially wary, began to notice his dedication. They saw a man working not for recognition, but for redemption. Slowly, their guarded skepticism gave way to cautious respect. One of the pivotal moments came during a winter charity ride, organized to deliver care packages to homeless veterans. Jake, despite the freezing temperatures, took the lead in organizing the supplies and coordinating with local shelters. When the captain of the riders acknowledged his efforts in front of the group, it marked a turning point in Jake's acceptance. "You've come a long way, Jake," the captain said, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "Keep it up." Jake's face lit up with a mixture of pride and humility. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." Healing through service. Jake's transformation rippled through the community, inspiring others to step forward and take responsibility for their own lives. It wasn't just veterans or bikers. Teachers, shopkeepers, and even local youth began to notice the changes taking root in their town. The Patriot Riders had become more than a club. They were a beacon of hope, a symbol of what could be achieved through unity and purpose. Thomas, watching it all unfold, felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. He had long believed that the true measure of a man wasn't in his medals or achievements, but in the lives he touched. Seeing men like Jake and the young rider find their footing was proof that his philosophy held weight. One evening, as the riders gathered around a bonfire at the clubhouse, Jake stood to address the group. His voice was steady, but the emotion in it was palpable. "I owe all of you more than I can ever repay," he began. "But most of all, I owe Mr. Reynolds. He didn't just call for backup that night. He showed me what it means to stand tall, even when the odds aren't in your favor. I can't change the past, but I promise to spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it." The group erupted in applause, and Thomas, seated near the back, felt a lump rise in his throat. He nodded at Jake, a silent acknowledgement of the hard road the young man had traveled. The legacy grows. As the months turned into years, the impact of that single evening in the parking lot continued to grow. The Patriot Riders expanded their outreach, mentoring troubled youth, supporting families of deployed soldiers, and advocating for veteran health care. Jake became one of their most passionate leaders, his past serving as a testament to the power of redemption. Thomas, now nearing 70, began to step back from active involvement. But his influence was woven into the fabric of the group, and his wisdom remained a guiding force. On the anniversary of the parking lot incident, the riders gathered to honor Thomas. Jake, now a respected figure in the community, stood before the group with a plaque in his hands. "Sergeant Thomas Reynolds," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion, "you showed us that courage isn't just about facing an enemy. It's about standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. You've changed more lives than you'll ever know." As Thomas accepted the plaque, he looked out at the faces around him, young and old, scared and whole, each one a testament to the enduring power of integrity and compassion. "Thank you," he said simply. "But remember, this isn't about me. It's about us. What we build together will outlast us all." And with that, the bonfire roared higher, casting its warm light on a community united by respect, redemption, and a shared mission to make the world a better place, one act of courage at a time. This emphasizes the ongoing growth and ripple effects of Thomas's actions, focusing on the transformative power of mentorship, community, and the willingness to change. It highlights how a single act of integrity can inspire a legacy far greater than any one individual. A legacy of light. As the years rolled by, the Patriot Riders' reputation grew far beyond their small town. What began as a group of veterans seeking camaraderie became a movement that inspired communities across the region. They were no longer just a biker club. They were a force for good, a symbol of how ordinary people could make an extraordinary difference. For Thomas Reynolds, now nearing 75, life had settled into a quieter rhythm. He still attended the occasional rider event, and his home remained a gathering place for those seeking wisdom or a strong cup of coffee. But he spent more time tending to his garden, reflecting on the years behind him and the stories he had collected along the way. One crisp fall morning, Thomas sat on his porch, a blanket draped over his knees, watching the leaves flutter to the ground. The air smelled of earth and wood smoke, and the world seemed peaceful. He was lost in thought when a familiar sound pulled him back to the present, the low rumble of motorcycles approaching. 3 bikes pulled up in front of his house, and from them dismounted Jake, the young rider Thomas had mentored, and a woman Thomas didn't recognize. Jake had changed so much since the first time he'd stood on this porch. Now a leader within the Riders, he carried himself with quiet confidence, a man who had earned respect through action. "Morning, Sergeant," Jake said, grinning as he climbed the steps. "Morning, Jake. Who's your friend?" Thomas asked, gesturing to the woman. "This is Maria," Jake said. She's like I was, looking for a second chance." Thomas studied Maria carefully. She was young, probably in her late 20s, with a wary look in her eyes and a tension in her posture that spoke of a hard life. "You came to the right place," Thomas said, his voice steady. "Come on in. A new beginning." Over coffee, Maria shared her story. She had grown up in a tough neighborhood, surrounded by crime and chaos. Joining a local biker gang had seemed like her only option at the time, a way to survive. But the life she thought would give her strength only brought pain. She had finally walked away, but the scars of her choices lingered. "I want to do something better with my life," Maria said, her voice trembling. "But I don't know where to start." Thomas nodded, listening intently. When she finished, he leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "You're starting right now," he said. "The fact that you're here, asking for help, shows more courage than most people ever find. The past doesn't define you. What you do next does." Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. "Do you really think I can change?" Thomas smiled gently. "I don't think you can change. I've seen it happen before. But it won't be easy. You'll need to work hard, prove to yourself and others that you're serious. Are you ready for that?" Maria nodded, determination flickering in her eyes. "I am." Jake chimed in. "We've already talked about her joining the Riders community projects. I thought that would be a good start." "It's more than a good start," Thomas said. "It's a way to turn your pain into purpose." The torch is passed. Maria quickly became a part of the Patriot Riders' efforts. She threw herself into every task, building care packages for veterans, mentoring at-risk youth, and speaking to women in shelters about her journey. Her openness and honesty struck a chord, especially with young people who saw in her a reflection of their own struggles. As Thomas watched Maria's transformation, he felt a sense of pride and satisfaction that was hard to put into words. She wasn't just changing her own life, she was becoming a beacon for others, much like Jake had done before her. One evening, during a Riders meeting at the clubhouse, Jake made an announcement. "We've been talking as a group," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "And we want to honor the man who started it all, the man who showed us what it means to lead by example." The room erupted in applause as Jake unveiled a plaque dedicated to Thomas. It read, "To Sergeant Thomas Reynolds, for your courage, compassion, and dedication to service. Your legacy lives on in every life you've touched." Thomas stood, his weathered face softened by the emotion of the moment. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with gratitude. "But this isn't about me. It's about all of us. We've built something together that's bigger than any one person, and that's how it should be." As the applause died down, Thomas looked at Jake and Maria. "You're the future," he said. "It's up to you to carry the torch now." The ripple expands. In the years that followed, the Patriot Riders' influence spread even further. They partnered with schools, businesses, and other organizations to address issues like homelessness, addiction, and mental health. They became a lifeline for those who felt forgotten, a reminder that no one was beyond redemption. Maria eventually took on a leadership role, using her story to inspire countless others. Jake, now a father, brought his children to Riders events, teaching them the values he had learned from Thomas. And though Thomas stepped back from active involvement, his presence was felt in every project, every speech, every act of kindness. One day, as Thomas sat on his porch watching the sunset, Maria arrived with a small group of young people she had been mentoring. "We wanted to say thank you," she said, handing him a book. Thomas opened it to find page after page of letters, photos and stories from people whose lives had been changed by the Patriot Riders. He flipped through the book, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "Looks like the ripple keeps growing," he said softly. Maria smiled. "Because you started it, Sergeant. A legacy of light." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Thomas sat quietly, the book resting on his lap. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the battles he had fought, the lives he had touched, and the lessons he had learned. In the fading light, he felt a profound sense of peace. His legacy wasn't in medals or accolades. It was in the lives of people like Jake, Maria, and the countless others who had found hope through the Patriot Riders. It was in the community they had built together, a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and the belief that anyone could change. And as the stars began to dot the night sky, Thomas knew that his work, though quieter now, would never truly end. For every life touched, every torch passed, and every ripple sent outward carried with it a piece of him, a legacy of light that would shine long after he was gone. This conclusion focuses on the enduring impact of Thomas's actions, showing how the ripple effect of his courage and leadership continues to grow through the lives of others. It's a reminder that even the smallest acts of integrity can create a legacy far greater than we imagine. The eternal flame. The years continued their steady march forward, and though Thomas Reynolds had long since stepped back from active leadership, his presence remained an enduring part of the Patriot Riders' culture. His wisdom, shared in quiet conversations or moments of reflection, had become the foundation of a movement that reached far beyond the small town where it all began. One chilly November evening, as the leaves scattered in the wind and the town prepared for its annual Veterans Day event, Thomas sat in his armchair, a fire crackling in the hearth beside him. His hands rested on the journal he had kept for years, a collection of thoughts, stories, and lessons he hoped would outlive him. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. "Come in," he called, his voice still carrying strength despite the years. The door opened to reveal Jake, now in his mid-40s, his once boyish energy tempered by the wisdom of leadership. Behind him stood Maria, her posture confident and her eyes alight with purpose. She was flanked by two younger riders, their jackets bearing the unmistakable crest of the Patriot Riders, a symbol that had come to mean far more than motorcycles and leather. "Evening, Sergeant," Jake said, stepping inside and offering a respectful nod. Thomas smiled. "Evening, Jake. And Maria. Who are these two?" Maria stepped forward, gesturing to the younger riders. "This is Elijah and Tess. They're part of the new recruits. We thought it was time they heard the full story of how the riders came to be." Thomas chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Ah, so you've brought me an audience." Jake grinned. "More than that, Sergeant. We've brought you family." The story retold. The group gathered in Thomas's living room, the younger riders sitting attentively on the edge of their seats. Thomas began to recount the tale of the parking lot incident, his calm defiance in the face of intimidation, the arrival of the riders, and the transformation of those who had once been his adversaries. But Thomas didn't just focus on the dramatic moments. He spoke of the quiet battles that came after, the small but significant choices that shaped the Patriot Riders into what they have become. He talked about the importance of listening, of showing up for people even when it wasn't convenient, and of finding strength in unity. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then Elijah, the younger of the two recruits, spoke. "Sergeant, what made you believe those bikers, the ones who harassed you, could change? Most people would have written them off." Thomas nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "It's easy to write people off, Elijah, but I've learned that everyone carries their own battles, their own scars. Sometimes what looks like cruelty is just pain turned outward. If you can see past that and offer them a chance, well, some will take it, and those are the ones who'll surprise you." Tess, her voice quiet but determined, asked, "How do you know when it's worth it? When to keep trying?" Thomas smiled. "You don't always know. That's the risk. But I found that erring on the side of hope is rarely a mistake. A torch passed. As the evening wore on, Jake and Maria shared their own stories of transformation, reinforcing the lessons Thomas had imparted. The younger writers listened with rapt attention, their expressions a mixture of admiration and determination. They weren't just hearing history, they were inheriting a legacy. Before they left, Jake handed Thomas a leather-bound book. "We've been working on this for a while," he said. "It's a collection of stories from the writers, how the group changed their lives, inspired them, gave them a second chance." Thomas opened the book, flipping through pages filled with photos, handwritten notes, and heartfelt testimonials. His eyes lingered on a photo of Jake and Maria standing in front of a group of writers, their arms around a group of kids they had mentored. "This," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion, "this is the real legacy. Not medals, not titles. This." Jake nodded. "And it's all because you believed in us, Sergeant." Thomas closed the book, his hands resting on the cover. "No," he said firmly. "It's because you believed in yourselves. I just gave you a push." The flame rekindled. In the days leading up to Veterans Day, the Patriot Writers worked tirelessly to prepare for the town's event. It had become an annual tradition, a way to honor not only veterans, but also the community that had grown around them. This year's event was special. It marked the 50th anniversary of the Writers' founding. On the day of the event, the town square was packed with people. Flags fluttered in the crisp breeze, and the air buzzed with conversation and laughter. At the center of it all was a stage, adorned with the Patriot Writers emblem, and a banner that read, "Honor, Redemption, Unity." As the ceremony began, Jake took the stage to deliver the keynote speech. His voice carried over the crowd, recounting the story of how the writers were born and the values that had sustained them. "Today," Jake said, his voice steady, "we honor not just those who served in uniform, but everyone who has fought to make their community better. People like Sergeant Thomas Reynolds, whose courage sparked a movement that continues to grow." The crowd erupted in applause as Thomas was helped onto the stage. Standing beside Jake and Maria, he looked out at the sea of faces, some old, some young, all connected by the invisible threads of shared purpose and respect. Taking the microphone, Thomas spoke briefly but powerfully. "What we've built together isn't just about motorcycles or veterans, or even second chances. It's about believing in each other. It's about carrying the flame of hope, of honor, and passing it on to the next generation. And looking out at all of you, I know that flame is burning brighter than ever. An eternal legacy." That evening, as the sun set and the town square emptied, Thomas sat on a bench watching the last of the crowd disperse. Maria and Jake joined him, their expressions reflective. "You did good, Sergeant," Jake said quietly. "Better than good." Thomas smiled, the lines on his face deepening with warmth. "We did good." As the first stars appeared in the night sky, Thomas felt a profound sense of peace. His legacy wasn't just in the writers or the stories told about him. It was in the lives changed, the hearts healed, and the communities united. It was in the eternal flame that burned brightly, carried forward by those who believed in something greater than themselves. And as the stars continued to shine, Thomas knew that flame would never go out. This final chapter emphasizes the culmination of Thomas's journey, focusing on the enduring impact of his actions and the way his legacy continues to inspire others. It ties together the themes of mentorship, redemption, and community, leaving a lasting impression of hope and purpose. A quiet closure. Years later, the story of Thomas Reynolds became legend within the Patriot Writers. New recruits heard tales of his courage, his wisdom, and the quiet strength that had built a movement. Though Thomas himself had passed on, his name was spoken with reverence, not for grandiose deeds, but for the simple, profound way he lived his life. The writers honored his memory in their own way. Every year, they held a special ride, tracing the route from the parking lot where the Patriot Writers had first answered his call to the diner, where so many plans had been made. It wasn't just a ride. It was a journey of reflection, gratitude, and commitment to carrying forward the lessons Thomas had imparted. The eternal lesson. One summer evening, Maria, now one of the senior leaders of the Riders, stood before a group of new recruits. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the clubhouse lawn, as she shared the story of Thomas's stand against the bikers and how it had sparked a ripple effect that changed countless lives. "Thomas taught us something simple yet powerful," Maria said, her voice steady and clear. "It's not about being the loudest or the strongest. It's about standing firm in what you believe, even when it's hard. He showed us that change doesn't happen in grand gestures. It happens in the small, everyday choices to do what's right." She paused, scanning the young faces before her. "Remember this. Your legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's the impact you have on the people around you while you're here. If you live with integrity, if you choose compassion over judgment, and if you believe in the power of redemption, your flame will never go out." The recruits nodded, their expressions filled with determination. Maria smiled, knowing that Thomas's lessons would live on in them, just as they had in her and so many others. A final reflection. In the quiet of her home that night, Maria sat by her window, looking up at the stars. She thought about Thomas, about Jake, about the countless lives touched by the Patriot Riders. The world was still far from perfect, but it was better for the small acts of courage and kindness they had chosen to undertake. And that, she realized, was the ultimate legacy. Not perfection, but progress. Not fame, but purpose. Not power, but the quiet, unshakable strength of a life well lived. As she turned out the light and prepared for bed, Maria whispered a quiet thanks to Thomas Reynolds, a man who had stood firm in the face of fear and, in doing so, lit a fire that would never be extinguished. The lesson. This story leaves us with a profound truth. Greatness isn't in titles or accolades, but in the lives we touch and the courage we show in the face of adversity. It reminds us to stand for what's right, to believe in the power of redemption, and to understand that the smallest acts of integrity can create ripples that change the world. Thomas Reynolds may no longer walk among us, but his legacy lives on in every act of kindness, every stand for justice, and every flame of hope kindled by those inspired by his story. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.